In the early hours of a crisp autumn morning in 1995, a small town in Oregon awoke to a mystery that would haunt its residents for decades. The sun had barely crept over the horizon when an urgent 911 call shattered the stillness, setting off a chain of events that would unravel the life of a beloved young woman, Emily Carter. Emily was the kind of person everyone thought they knew. At 28, she was vibrant, full of life, and deeply rooted in the community of Ashland. She taught third grade at the local elementary school, where her students adored her for her creativity and warmth. Parents spoke of her dedication, often recalling how she stayed late to help struggling children or organized weekend nature hikes to inspire a love for the environment. To her friends, Emily was the glue that held their social circle together, always planning the next gathering, always ready with a comforting word or a shared laugh. Her life, however, was not without its challenges. Emily had recently ended a long-term relationship and was in the process of redefining her future. She had just moved into a cozy bungalow on the outskirts of town, a place she hoped would be her sanctuary. Neighbors often saw her tending to her garden, her hands dirty with soil, her face serene, seemingly at peace with her newfound solitude. But that tranquility was shattered one fateful October morning. Emily was last seen leaving her home to go for her usual early morning run along the peaceful trails that wound through the nearby forest. She never returned. Her absence was immediately felt when she didn't show up for work, prompting concerned calls from her colleagues and friends. The initial search was swift but fruitless. Her running shoes were found neatly placed by her front door, her car parked in the driveway, keys still hanging on their usual hook. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. The town was swept into a frenzy, volunteers combing through the dense woods, every crevice and cranny explored. But there was no trace of Emily. Then the 911 call came. A jogger reported finding something unsettling on the trail, a solitary blood-stained scarf that unmistakably belonged to Emily. The discovery sent chills through the community, transforming what had been a hopeful search into a grim investigation. Whispers of foul play began to spread, casting a shadow over the small town. As the days turned into weeks, hope began to wane. But Emily's family refused to give up. They clung to the belief that she was out there somewhere, waiting to be found. The initial investigation faltered, hampered by a lack of evidence and the eerie absence of leads. The case went cold, but the memory of Emily Carter lingered. In those early days, no one could have imagined that decades later, Emily would be spotted again, not in the vibrant life she once led, but wandering the streets with 2 children by her side. But that revelation was still years away, hidden in the shadows of a mystery only beginning to unfold. The community was left with one burning question: what happened to Emily Carter? Emily Carter was the heart of her community, a dedicated nurse known for her warm smile and an infectious laugh that could brighten even the gloomiest hospital ward. Her life was one of routine and simplicity, punctuated by the occasional adventure with her close-knit group of friends. She was an avid runner, often seen jogging through the trails that wound around the nearby forest, her safe haven. On that fateful October morning, as the sun barely crested the horizon, Emily donned her favorite running gear and stepped out of her cozy cottage. She was seen by a neighbor, exchanging a cheerful wave, an image that would later haunt the town. Her usual route took her through a series of woodland paths, a haven of tranquility where her mind could wander freely. But that morning would be different. That morning would be the last anyone saw of Emily Carter in the life she knew. When Emily failed to clock in for her shift, alarm bells rang. It was unlike her to miss work without notice. Her colleagues, initially concerned, soon felt a gnawing fear. Calls to her home went unanswered. By evening, when the sun dipped below the horizon, The worry had escalated to panic. Friends and family gathered at her home, the air thick with anxiety and the scent of brewing coffee. The discovery of Emily's running shoes neatly placed by her front door was the first sign that something was amiss. Her car, undisturbed in the driveway, suggested she had never intended to be gone for long. Yet, as the hours dragged on, the chilling reality settled in. Emily was missing. The search began at dawn the following day. Volunteers, local law enforcement, and search dogs scoured the trails, the woods echoing with Emily's name called out into the silence. It was a community united in hope, driven by the desperation to find one of their own, but hope turned to horror when a jogger stumbled upon Emily's blood-stained scarf. It lay half-buried in the fallen leaves, a vibrant red against the muted browns of the forest floor. The realization that Emily could have met with foul play sent a shiver through the town. The initial investigation was marred by missteps. Leads fizzled, and interviews led to dead ends. The police, overwhelmed and understaffed, struggled to piece together the fragments of that morning. Theories abounded, from a random act of violence to the possibility of Emily choosing to disappear. But none of them could explain the scarf, nor the eerie silence that followed her disappearance. Emily's family was relentless. Her sister, Sarah, became the face of the search, appearing on local news stations with an impassioned plea for information. It was a plea that echoed through the community, but as days turned to weeks and weeks to months, the search waned, the hope of finding Emily alive dwindling with each passing day. The town moved on, but for those closest to Emily, time was marked by anniversaries of her disappearance, each year a stark reminder of the void she left behind. Yet through the silence, a question lingered. What had truly happened to Emily Carter? In the quiet of the night, as the world slept, another story was unfolding, a story that would take decades to reveal itself. And it all began with a single haunting call to 911. The 911 call came in at 3:45 a.m., a voice trembling with fear on the other end. A neighbor, awakened by the sound of a muffled scream, reported seeing a shadowy figure near the Carter residence. The dispatcher's voice was calm and reassuring, promising to send a patrol car immediately. But by the time officers arrived, the quiet street was once again enveloped in stillness. The only sound, the distant hum of traffic and the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. The first 48 hours were crucial, yet they slipped away like sand through fingers. The initial police response was swift, but perhaps too hurried. An assumption was made: Emily had left of her own accord. The officers, juggling multiple cases, concluded she would return, as many did. It was a conclusion that would haunt them for years to come. Detective Jameson, known for his tenacity, was assigned to the case. He was methodical, but the clock was ticking. The first interviews were conducted in a flurry of activity. Friends, family, neighbors, all questioned, their statements recorded in hurried scrawls. Yet, amidst the chaos, key details were overlooked. A neighbor mentioned seeing a dark sedan parked near the Carter home the night Emily vanished, but it was dismissed as unrelated. Another recalled hearing what sounded like a heated argument, but this too was set aside, attributed to the wind carrying voices from a nearby house. The urgency to act was there, but the focus was diffused, like a flashlight beam in a fog. Emily's family, desperate and frantic, were a hurricane of emotions. Her father, stoic yet crumbling inside, tried to maintain a facade of strength. Her mother, a shadow of herself, clung to Emily's childhood teddy bear, her eyes hollow with grief. Sarah, Emily's sister, was relentless, her voice the loudest amidst the chorus of despair. She wouldn't just leave. She had plans. She was happy, she insisted, her words echoing with conviction. As the hours slipped by, speculation took root. Was it a lover's quarrel, an abduction? Theories swirled like autumn leaves, but none held firm. The media, hungry for headlines, spun stories that only added to the confusion, painting a picture of a troubled young woman, a narrative far from the truth. The police continued their search, but with each passing hour, their resolve faltered. Leads grew colder and the trail faded into obscurity. In the darkness, Emily's family clung to hope, a fragile lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. But the question remained, unanswered and haunting. Where was Emily Carter? As dawn broke on the third day, Detective Jameson gathered his team. They needed a new approach, a fresh perspective. But with resources stretched thin and the pressure mounting, the question loomed large. Would they find her before it was too late? And somewhere, in the shadows, the truth lay waiting, buried beneath layers of time and silence, waiting for the day when it would finally come to light. Detective Jameson stood in front of his weary team, a map of the town spread out before them, pinpricks marking places already searched. The air was tense, thick with the weight of unspoken fears. He cleared his throat, determined to rally his colleagues. We need to comb through everything again, revisit the witnesses, re-evaluate every piece of evidence. No detail is too small, he urged, his voice firm, yet carrying an undercurrent of desperation. Meanwhile, Emily's family was in turmoil. Her father, Mr. Carter, paced the living room restlessly. He was a man of action, not accustomed to feeling so helpless. "We need answers," he muttered, mostly to himself, as he stared at the family photographs lining the mantelpiece. Mrs. Carter sat silently, clutching the teddy bear tighter, her mind replaying every moment of Emily's childhood, searching for signs she might have missed. Her eyes darted to Sarah, who was furiously writing in a notebook, jotting down every memory, every clue she could recall. Sarah's voice broke the silence. "What about that argument the neighbor heard? Why isn't anyone looking into that?" Her frustration was palpable. Mr. Carter stopped pacing. "You're right, Sarah. We need to push them on this." Back at the station, Detective Jameson was going through witness statements once more. The dark sedan, the argument, it gnawed at him. Why hadn't these leads been pursued with more vigor? He scribbled notes, determined to correct these early oversights. The phone rang, jolting him from his thoughts. It was Officer Riley, his voice urgent. "Detective, you need to see something." Within moments, Jameson was in the briefing room, where a grainy surveillance video from a nearby gas station played on the screen. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m., the night Emily disappeared. A dark sedan, matching the neighbor's description, was captured briefly in the frame. Jameson's heart raced. "Get the make and model of that car. We need to trace it. This could be our break." But even as he felt a surge of hope, doubt crept in. Would this lead turn out to be another dead end? The pressure to find Emily was mounting, every second a reminder of their dwindling time. Outside, the media continued their relentless pursuit. Headlines speculated wildly, fueling public curiosity and concern. But to the Carters, it was all noise, distracting from the only thing that mattered: bringing Emily home. As the day wore on, another witness came forward. A jogger, who had been running on the trail near the Carter home the night of Emily's disappearance, recalled seeing a figure walking hurriedly towards the woods. It was too dark to make out any features, but something about the person's demeanor had seemed off. Jameson immediately dispatched officers to search the wooded area, though he knew it was a long shot. Yet in a case where every possibility had to be explored, it was a chance they had to take. The day ended with more questions than answers, the investigation still mired in uncertainty. But as night fell, a sense of resolve settled over Jameson and his team. They would not rest until they brought Emily back. Unbeknownst to them, a figure lurked in the shadows, watching their every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. The clock was ticking, and the truth, elusive and dangerous, lingered just out of reach. As the sun rose on the second day of Emily's disappearance, the atmosphere in the Carter household was one of palpable tension. The family, huddled together in the living room, clung to hope as they awaited news from the police. Emily's mother, Carol, her eyes red from a sleepless night, whispered prayers under her breath while her father, Tom, paced the room, his frustration barely contained. The phone rang, breaking the heavy silence. It was Detective Jameson, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. He informed the Carters about the newly discovered surveillance footage and the ongoing search in the woods. "We're doing everything we can," he assured them, though even he knew these words offered little comfort. Down at the station, the investigation was in full swing. Officers pored over the grainy footage, hoping to identify the elusive sedan, but the low resolution and poor lighting made it difficult to pin down any definitive details. Jameson knew they needed more than just a blurry image. Meanwhile, officers scoured the wooded area near the Carter home, their flashlights slicing through the early morning fog. The joggers' tip, vague as it was, had reignited their determination. Yet as the hours passed with no significant findings, doubt began to seep in. Could they be chasing shadows? Back at the precinct, a sense of urgency permeated the air. Jameson gathered his team for a briefing. "We need to re-interview every neighbor, every potential witness. No detail is too small," he instructed, his voice firm. "And let's get the media involved in a controlled way. We need the public's help, not hysteria." Reporters, hungry for any morsel of information, camped outside the police station. Emily's disappearance had gripped the community, and speculation ran rampant. Headlines screamed of potential foul play, each more sensational than the last. But within the walls of the precinct, the focus remained unwavering. As the first 48 hours slipped away, the initial police response faced scrutiny. A crucial mistake had been made, the assumption that Emily had run away. This early misstep had cost them precious time. Jameson felt the weight of this oversight pressing down on him. Amidst this chaos, a call came in from a woman who claimed to have seen a girl fitting Emily's description at a diner 2 towns over. The girl had seemed disoriented, she said, accompanied by a man who looked out of place. Jameson dispatched officers immediately, though he knew the lead was tenuous at best. Back at the Carter home, Carol and Tom clung to each other, their hope wavering but unbroken. They had begun to rally the community, organizing search parties and distributing flyers. The town, once a backdrop of normalcy, was now a canvas of fear and uncertainty. As dusk settled, Jameson received another call, this time from an officer in the field. "Detective, we've found something." His heart skipped a beat, the promise of a breakthrough hanging in the air. But as he listened, his hope was tempered by caution. Would this lead finally crack the case, or would it too dissolve into the ether of unsolved mysteries? And in the shadows, the figure watched. The game had begun, but the stakes were higher than anyone could imagine. Jameson listened intently, his breath bated, as the officer relayed the details. They had found a backpack near the diner, abandoned in haste, its contents scattered along the gravel. Among the items was Emily's school ID, unmistakable in its familiarity. The air around Jameson crackled with a mix of anticipation and dread. Was this the breadcrumb they had desperately needed, or another cruel trick of fate? The backpack's discovery ignited a frenzy of activity. Officers combed the area, eyes scanning for any further signs, while Jameson directed the search with a fervor that belied his exhaustion. But as the hours trudged on, the trail grew colder. No further evidence emerged, leaving them with more questions than answers. In the small town of Riverton, where Emily had lived, whispers began to swirl. Theories spread like wildfire, each more implausible than the last. A local mechanic, known for his erratic behavior, found himself at the center of the rumor mill. His connection to Emily was tenuous at best. a distant cousin of a friend. But the town, desperate for resolution, latched onto the narrative with fervor. Jameson, aware of the community's growing unrest, knew he had to address the rumors head-on. The mechanic was brought in for questioning, his demeanor a mix of bewilderment and anger. The interrogation room was a bleak, sterile place, its walls bearing witness to countless stories of despair and confession. "What were you doing the night Emily disappeared?" Jameson's voice was steady, probing. "I was at home," the mechanic replied, his eyes darting nervously. "I didn't do anything. I barely know her." But as the questioning continued, it became clear that the mechanic was not the key to unlocking the mystery. His alibi, though shaky, held up under scrutiny. The community's suspicions, fueled by fear and desperation, had led them astray. Despite the setback, Jameson was undeterred. He returned to the precinct, poring over the case files, searching for anything they might have missed. But with each passing day, the trail grew colder, and the case began to slip into the realm of unsolved mysteries. The media, once a frenzied beast, now turned its gaze elsewhere, the headlines fading to whispers. But for Carol and Tom, the agony of not knowing was a constant gnawing presence. Their daughter was out there somewhere, and they refused to let her slip into the shadows of forgotten cases. Then, as if to taunt them further, a new twist emerged. A local woman came forward, claiming to have seen Emily in the company of a mysterious stranger. Her description was vague, but it reignited the town's curiosity. Who was this man, and how did he fit into the puzzle? Jameson, weary but resolute, knew they were running out of time. Leads were drying up, and hope was beginning to wane. Yet, amidst the darkness, he clung to the belief that every case, no matter how cold, had a solution waiting to be uncovered. The question remained, would they find it before it was too late? The figure in the shadows watched with interest, aware that the game was far from over. The stakes were high, and the pieces were in motion, but in the end, who would emerge victorious? As the days turned into weeks, the buzz surrounding Emily's disappearance slowly faded into the background noise of everyday life. The townspeople, initially galvanized by shock and concern, began to return to their routines, their vigilance dulled by the passage of time. Yet, whispers persisted in hushed conversations at the local diner and in the aisles of the grocery store. Rumors, fueled by half-truths and speculation, pointed fingers at familiar faces. Jameson sat at his desk, the dim glow of the lamp casting shadows across the piles of reports and witness statements. Despite the lack of progress, his resolve remained unbroken. He knew the answers were hidden somewhere within these pages, waiting to be uncovered. But as the trail grew colder, the pressure to find answers mounted. The first suspect, a local handyman known for his odd hours and reclusive nature, became the subject of intense scrutiny. His name, whispered in the corridors of the precinct, was synonymous with suspicion. It was said he had a penchant for the unattainable, a loner with a dark past. Yet when pressed for details, those who knew him offered little more than conjecture. Jameson leaned back in his chair, recalling the murmurings of the community. The handyman's alibi was thin, but it was all he had. He was at the bar that night, wasn't he? He mused aloud to his partner, who nodded in agreement, eyes weary from the long hours. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, the rumor mill churned relentlessly. The handyman's face was etched into the collective consciousness of the town as a figure of intrigue and potential guilt. But Jameson knew better than to pin the case on whispers alone. He needed facts, indisputable and solid. Meanwhile, Carol and Tom were trapped in a cycle of hope and despair, each new suspect offering a glimmer of resolution before fading into disappointment. The nights were the hardest, the silence of their daughter's absence a constant reminder of their loss. The case files lay sprawled across Jameson's desk, a testament to the exhaustive and, thus far, futile search for truth. His eyes lingered on the testimony of the local woman who claimed to have seen Emily. The description of the mysterious stranger was frustratingly vague, a spectre with no face or name. Yet something about the woman's account gnawed at him. Was it possible that Emily had left with someone willingly? The notion was both a relief and a torment. It offered a semblance of agency on Emily's part, but raised more questions than it answered. As the investigation hit a wall, Jameson found himself at a crossroads. He could continue to chase shadows, or he could take a step back and reassess. The urgency of the case weighed heavily on him, but he knew that rushing blindly would only lead them further astray. The town, once eager to help, had grown wary. The fear of the unknown hung over them like a shroud, and trust was a commodity in short supply. In the absence of new leads, the case threatened to join the ranks of the unsolved, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of even the most idyllic communities. But Jameson wasn't ready to give up, not yet. He knew that somewhere out there, the key to unlocking the mystery awaited. He just had to find it before time ran out. As he closed the file for the night, his mind was already racing, formulating a plan for the days to come. The figure in the shadows watched, knowing that the game was far from over. The stakes were high, and the pieces were still in motion. But in the end, would the truth be uncovered, or would it remain hidden just out of reach? Jameson awoke the next morning with a singular focus. The image of Emily's face, smiling down from countless missing posters, was etched in his mind. But today, the weight of the previous night's revelations felt different. There was a new determination, an urgency that propelled him out of bed and into action. The town was waking up slowly, its streets bathed in the soft morning light. Yet, beneath the surface, the tension was palpable. Rumors had begun to swirl like autumn leaves in the wind, each more sinister than the last. Whispers of a drifter seen loitering near the school, a shadowy figure lurking at the edge of town, and a local with a history that raised eyebrows. Jameson began his day with a visit to the diner, a hub of local gossip and speculation. The clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation filled the air. As he nursed a cup of coffee, he listened. Snippets of conversation drifted his way, fragments of suspicion and fear. Always thought there was something off about him. They say he was seen leaving town that night. Could be anyone, you know. People don't just vanish. One name surfaced more than others. A man known only as Hank, a recluse who lived on the outskirts of town. His presence had always been an enigma, a man who kept to himself and his secrets. Jameson had encountered Hank once or twice, but the interactions had been brief and unremarkable. Yet now, it seemed, the town had found its scapegoat. Armed with this new information, Jameson decided to pay Hank a visit. The drive out to his isolated cabin was a journey into another world, a place where the past and present seemed to converge. As he approached, he noticed the dilapidated state of the property, the windows boarded up, the yard overgrown with weeds. Hank greeted him with a wary eye, his demeanor guarded. The conversation that followed was tense, a verbal chess match where each word was carefully chosen. But despite Jameson's probing, Hank revealed little. His alibi was thin, but not entirely unbelievable. He claimed to have been miles away the night Emily disappeared, fishing at a secluded lake, alone. With no concrete evidence, Jameson was left with only his gut feeling and the town's growing paranoia. The investigation, once vibrant with hope, now felt like a futile chase. The lack of solid leads was suffocating, the trail growing colder by the hour. As Jameson drove back to town, the weight of failure settled heavily upon him. The community's trust was eroding, and the case was slipping through his fingers. He knew that if a breakthrough didn't come soon, Emily's disappearance would become just another unsolved mystery, a haunting reminder of the darkness that could swallow a person whole, leaving nothing but shadows in its wake. Yet, amidst the despair, a flicker of hope remained. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered. All Jameson needed was the key to unlock it, a key he was determined to find, no matter the cost. The setting sun cast long shadows across the road, a metaphor for the journey ahead. As Jameson continued his search, he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, and that the answers he sought were closer than he dared to believe. The years turned slowly, like pages in a forgotten book, covered in dust on a neglected shelf. The town of Maplewood, once vibrant with whispers and speculation about Emily's sudden disappearance, had settled into a quiet resignation. Life moved on, as it always does, but for the Johnson family, time had stopped in 1995. Emily's parents, Martha and Frank, aged visibly with each passing year. Their home, once filled with laughter and the bustling energy of a young family, now echoed with silence. Photographs of Emily adorned every wall, her smile frozen in time. They clung to these memories, remnants of a life that felt more like a dream with each passing day. Martha spent countless hours in front of the computer, diving into forums and chat rooms, hoping to find a clue, a whisper, anything that might lead her to her daughter. Frank, on the other hand, took a more traditional approach. He became a familiar face at the local library, poring over old newspapers and public records, searching for patterns or anomalies that others might have overlooked. Every year, on the anniversary of Emily's disappearance, the Johnsons would host a candlelight vigil at the town square. Fewer people attended as the years went by, but those who remained were steadfast in their support. They lit candles, shared stories, and held on to hope, even as it dwindled. Jameson, too, felt the weight of the unsolved case. He had moved on from his position as lead investigator, but Emily's file never left his desk. He worked other cases, but the shadows of this one lingered in the corners of his mind. At night, he would sift through the evidence again, trying to see what he had missed. There was always something nagging at him, a feeling that the answer was just beyond his reach. In the quiet moments, when the world seemed to pause, the Johnsons would talk about Emily as if she was still just a room away. They shared stories of her childhood, her dreams of becoming a teacher, her love for the stars. These conversations were their lifeline, a way to keep her spirit alive even as the years took their toll. Maplewood, meanwhile, continued to grow. New families moved in, unaware of the town's haunted past. Businesses flourished, schools expanded, and the chatter of everyday life filled the streets. Yet for those who remembered, Emily's absence was a silent spectre, a reminder of vulnerability and loss. As the world moved on, so did technology. DNA advancements and new forensic techniques offered a glimmer of hope, a chance to revisit old evidence with fresh eyes. But each re-examination brought the same result: nothing. The case remained unsolved, a cold case in every sense of the word. Despite the lack of progress, Martha and Frank never gave up. Their private investigation continued, fueled by love and desperation. They hired private detectives, consulted psychics, and even considered the supernatural. Nothing was off the table when it came to finding their daughter. And then, one day, a letter arrived in the mail. It was postmarked from a town several states away, the handwriting unfamiliar. Inside was a single photograph, grainy and faded, of a woman with 2 young children. She was seated on a park bench, her face partially obscured by a hood. But there was something about her posture, the tilt of her head, that caught Martha's attention. Could it be? Was this Emily alive after all these years? The question hung in the air, a tantalizing possibility that reignited the flame of hope. The Johnsons knew they had to act quickly to follow this new lead, no matter where it might take them. As they packed their bags and prepared for the journey, they couldn't help but wonder if this was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. Was the key to Emily's disappearance finally within their grasp? The uncertainty was both thrilling and terrifying, a reminder that the truth, whatever it might be, was out there waiting to be uncovered. The road stretched out before them, an unbroken ribbon of asphalt leading into the unknown. Martha and Frank sat in silence as the landscape blurred past, their minds racing with possibilities. The photograph lay on the dashboard, a constant reminder of the hope that had been rekindled after so many years of darkness. As they drove, Martha's thoughts drifted back to those early days of Emily's disappearance. The community had rallied around them at first, organizing searches, spreading flyers, and offering whatever support they could. But as weeks turned into months and months into years, the fervor faded. People moved on with their lives, and the Johnsons were left to navigate their grief alone. For Martha and Frank, time had not healed the wound. It had only deepened it, carving a hollow space in their hearts where Emily's laughter used to echo. They watched as their friends celebrated milestones, weddings, graduations, births, while their own lives remained suspended in a perpetual state of waiting. But they refused to let Emily's memory fade. They became relentless in their pursuit of answers, turning their home into a makeshift investigation headquarters. Walls lined with maps, timelines, and photographs bore testament to their dedication. Each new piece of information, no matter how trivial, was meticulously catalogued in the hope that it would one day complete the puzzle. And yet, the years slipped by with cruel indifference. Leads dried up, and the case file at the local police station gathered dust. The world moved forward, leaving the Johnsons stranded in a past they couldn't escape. Until now. As they crossed state lines, Frank broke the silence. He spoke of the first Christmas without Emily, the empty chair at the table, the unopened gifts beneath the tree. Martha nodded, her eyes misting as she recalled how they had clung to each other, whispering promises to never give up. Their journey continued, the miles ticking away under the dim glow of the dashboard lights. They stopped only for essentials, driven by an urgency that had been reignited by the photograph. Each rest stop and gas station became a point of speculation. Could she have passed through here? Were these children her own? The days stretched into a blur of highways and small towns, until at last they reached their destination. It was a town like any other, with its own rhythms and secrets. But for Martha and Frank, it felt like the edge of revelation, a place where answers might finally be within reach. They checked into a modest motel, their minds too restless for sleep. The photograph was placed carefully on the nightstand, a beacon guiding their thoughts as they planned their next steps. Morning brought clarity and purpose. They would start with the local shelters, hoping to find someone who recognized the woman in the photograph. Each interaction was filled with cautious optimism, their hearts leaping at every glimmer of recognition, only to be dashed by the inevitable shake of the head. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across their path, they found themselves standing outside a shelter on the outskirts of town. The director, a kindly woman with a weathered face, examined the photograph with a thoughtful frown. "I've seen her," she said finally, her voice a lifeline pulling them from the depths of despair. "She comes in every few weeks, keeps to herself mostly. She's got 2 kids, sweet little ones." Martha's breath caught in her throat. Could this really be it? After all these years, were they finally on the cusp of finding Emily? The director continued, unaware of the storm of emotions raging within them. "She's due to drop by soon. You might just be in luck." No, as they left the shelter, the air seemed charged with possibility. The long silence was finally breaking, and with it, the promise of answers loomed large, casting its shadow over everything they had once known. The possibilities felt endless as they walked back to the motel, their minds racing with anticipation. Frank and Martha hardly spoke, each lost in their thoughts of what the next encounter might hold. Could this be the end of their long and painful search, or just another false hope in a journey that had tested every limit of their endurance? That night, sleep was elusive. Martha lay awake, her thoughts drifting back to the years that had passed since Emily's disappearance, the seemingly endless silence that had enveloped their lives. She remembered the initial shock, the desperate calls to friends and family, the countless flyers posted in every conceivable location. The early days had been a whirlwind of activity, fueled by adrenaline and the belief that Emily would be found quickly. But as weeks turned into months and months into years, the case grew cold. The police, overwhelmed by other cases, had moved on, and so had much of the community, but not Martha and Frank. They turned their grief into determination, launching their own investigation. They hired private detectives, searched through records, and followed every whisper of a lead, no matter how faint. They became familiar faces at support groups for families of missing persons, where they found solidarity, but also the harsh reality that not every story ends with closure. Their home became a shrine to Emily. Photos lined the walls, each capturing moments of joy before everything changed. They dedicated a room to her, untouched since the day she disappeared. It was a space frozen in time, a constant reminder of what they had lost. Frank took on extra work to fund their search efforts, his eyes constantly scanning crowds for a glimpse of their daughter. Martha, meanwhile, found solace in writing letters to Emily, one for each birthday and holiday that passed without her. She kept them in a box, hoping that one day Emily would read them and know she was never forgotten. The community, sympathetic at first, slowly returned to their routines. New families moved into the neighborhood, unaware of the invisible wound that marked Martha and Frank's lives. Friends who once offered comfort drifted away, unsure of what to say as years went by without news. And yet, amidst the silence, there were moments of grace. Strangers who heard their story and offered encouragement, or those who had experienced similar losses and shared their coping strategies. These small acts of kindness were lifelines, reminders that they were not alone in their suffering. Now, standing on the precipice of a possible reunion, Martha felt a mix of hope and fear. What if Emily had changed beyond recognition? What if she didn't want to be found? And the children, were they hers? Questions swirled in her mind, each one more daunting than the last. The next morning, as the first light crept through the motel curtains, they made their way back to the shelter. The town was still waking up, the streets quiet except for the soft hum of early commuters. Frank held Martha's hand tightly, a silent promise that whatever happened, they would face it together. As they approached the shelter, their hearts pounded in unison, their breaths shallow with anticipation. The director greeted them with a knowing smile, sensing the weight of their hopes and fears. She led them to a small room where they would wait for the woman who might hold the key to their past and future. Minutes felt like hours as they sat in silence, the clock ticking relentlessly. And then, from down the hall, came the sound of footsteps, a deliberate, unhurried pace that seemed to echo with each step closer. Martha and Frank exchanged a glance, each searching the other's eyes for reassurance. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside, the light casting a soft glow around her. Could it be Emily, after all these years? The question hung in the air, heavy with possibility and the weight of decades-long hope. The long silence was about to be broken. As the figure stepped into the room, Martha's breath caught in her throat. It was as if time itself had warped, compressing 20 long years into this single heart-stopping moment. The woman before them was thinner, her face etched with lines that told stories of hardship and survival. Her hair, once a vibrant chestnut, now bore streaks of silver. But her eyes, they were unmistakable. The same deep-set, soulful eyes that Martha had gazed into countless times before. Frank's voice, choked with emotion, broke the silence. "Emily," he whispered, as if afraid that speaking her name too loudly would shatter the fragile reality around them. The woman paused, her gaze flickering between the two of them, as if trying to place faces that were both familiar and foreign. The silence stretched, tension thickening the air. Martha's heart pounded, and she felt an overwhelming urge to reach out, to touch, to know for certain that this was real, but she held back, respecting the space needed for recognition to blossom. Emily's lips parted, and a small, tentative smile appeared. "Mom, Dad." Her voice, though softer and more worn, carried the melody of the daughter they had lost. Martha's hands flew to her mouth, tears spilling over as she nodded, unable to speak. The three of them moved together, an awkward but heartfelt embrace forming as years of separation melted away. For a moment, nothing else mattered. Not the questions, not the years of pain, not even the children they had yet to meet. It was just them, together again, against all odds. As they pulled apart, Emily's gaze dropped, a shadow of uncertainty crossing her face. I have so much to explain," she said, her voice tinged with both relief and apprehension. Frank squeezed her shoulder, his eyes soft with understanding. "We have all the time in the world now," he assured her, though he knew that the journey to understanding would be long and fraught with challenges. The director of the shelter, who had quietly observed the reunion, now stepped forward. Her presence was a gentle reminder of the practicalities that lay ahead. "There are some formalities to address," she said kindly, "and the children, they're eager to meet you." Martha nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of joy and trepidation. The children. They were part of this new reality, and she was determined to embrace them with open arms. As they moved to a larger room, the shelter director briefed them on the years that Emily had spent away. They learned of the struggle, of the times she had been close to reaching out but had been held back by fear and shame. It was a story of survival, of resilience, and of a mother's fierce, protective love for her children. The children entered, their curious eyes wide, taking in the strangers who were their grandparents. Martha knelt down, opening her arms to them, her heart full to bursting with love and hope. The long silence had indeed been broken, and now began the task of piecing together the fragments of their shattered lives. As the family sat together, the enormity of what lay ahead was daunting. But for the first time in decades, there was a sense of wholeness, a feeling that the future, though uncertain, was a journey they would face together. And as they shared stories and laughter, the community beyond the shelter's walls began to buzz with the news. Emily had been found. The woman who had vanished without a trace was alive, her story a testament to the enduring power of hope and love. Yet, amidst the joy and relief, one lingering question remained unanswered. What had led to Emily's disappearance all those years ago? As the family embraced their reunion, the spectre of the past loomed large, waiting for its secrets to be unearthed. The search for truth was just beginning, and the next chapter of their story was yet to be written. As the family continued to reconnect, the outside world was beginning to stir with renewed interest in Emily's case. The local news outlets picked up the story, broadcasting the miraculous reunion of a family separated by decades of silence and uncertainty. But as the headlines spread, they reached the attention of someone who had been quietly observing from the shadows, a retired detective named Frank Pierce. Frank had spent years working on cold cases, but Emily's disappearance had always haunted him. He had been a young detective when she vanished, and the lack of closure had left a mark on his career and conscience. Now retired, he had shifted his focus to volunteering with a non-profit that specialized in applying new forensic technologies to cold cases. When he saw Emily's name flash across the screen, something inside him reignited. Frank reached for his phone, dialing a number he knew by heart. On the other end, a colleague answered. Someone still active in the department who had access to the resources Frank needed. He spoke with urgency, his words steady but laced with the excitement of a man on a mission. "We need to reopen Emily's case," he insisted. "There's a new technology, genetic genealogy. It could give us answers we never had before." His colleague hesitated, reminding Frank of the challenges they had faced in the past. But Frank was unyielding. The breakthroughs in genetic genealogy had already solved cases thought impossible. It was a chance they couldn't pass up. Within days, the wheels were in motion. Old evidence boxes, long forgotten in the depths of the precinct's storage, were dusted off and brought back into the light. Each piece was meticulously catalogued and prepared for analysis. It was a painstaking process, but one that held the promise of answers. As the samples were sent off to the lab, Frank couldn't help but reflect on the years that had slipped by, the lost opportunities to find Emily. But now, with the technology available, there was hope, a glimmer of a chance to finally understand what had happened. Back at the shelter, Emily was slowly acclimating to her new reality. She was cautious, still processing the whirlwind of emotions and memories that had been stirred. Her children, while shy, were slowly coming out of their shells, curious about the world beyond the streets they had known. Martha and her husband were a constant presence, providing the support and reassurance Emily needed. They were a family again, albeit one with deep scars that would take time to heal. But amidst the rebuilding, the question of Emily's past lingered. They all knew that understanding it was key to moving forward. The days turned into weeks as the investigation progressed. Frank visited the lab frequently, checking on the status of the analysis. He was relentless, driven by the need to bring closure not only to Emily, but to himself as well. He had always believed in justice, and now he had a chance to deliver it. Then, one afternoon, the call came. It was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. The genetic genealogy had identified a distant relative connected to the evidence, a lead that could unravel the mystery of Emily's disappearance. Frank's heart raced as he jotted down the details. It was the moment he had been working toward, the flash of light in a case that had been shrouded in darkness for too long. But as he prepared to follow this new lead, he knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. The truth was within reach, yet its revelation could shake the foundations of everything Emily and her family had come to know. With renewed determination, Frank set out to uncover the secrets buried in the past. The story was far from over, and the next chapter promised to be the most revealing yet. As he drove toward the address linked to the newfound relative, he couldn't help but wonder what revelations awaited him at the end of the journey. The sun was beginning to set as Frank navigated the winding roads leading to the address. The air was thick with anticipation, a tangible electricity that seemed to pulse with each mile he covered. This was more than just a lead. It was a thread that could unravel the entire tapestry of Emily's past. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the cusp of something monumental. As he pulled up to a modest, weathered house on the outskirts of town, Frank took a moment to collect his thoughts. The house, while unassuming, held the potential to unlock the mysteries of a life put on hold. He approached the door with measured steps, his mind racing through the possible scenarios. Who was this distant relative? What did they know? And how would their revelation fit into the puzzle that was Emily's life? The door creaked open, revealing an elderly woman whose eyes bore the wisdom of a lifetime. She introduced herself as Margaret, a name that echoed with a hint of familiarity. As they settled into the cozy living room, Margaret's gaze lingered on the photos adorning the walls, images of family gatherings and milestones that hinted at stories untold. Frank explained the purpose of his visit, the genetic connection that had led him to her doorstep. Margaret listened intently, her expression a mix of surprise and contemplation. As Frank spoke, she nodded slowly, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. "I remember Emily," Margaret began, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "She was always such a bright and spirited girl, but then one day she just disappeared. It was as if the earth had swallowed her whole." Frank leaned in, sensing the importance of her words. Margaret continued, recounting how Emily used to visit during summers, how she would play in the fields and help in the kitchen. But then, after her disappearance, the family had been left with questions and whispers that never seemed to quiet. It was then that Margaret revealed something unexpected. "There was a man," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, as if afraid the very walls might listen. "He came around often, a friend of the family, or so we thought, but after Emily vanished, he disappeared too." Frank's heart skipped a beat. Could this mysterious man be the key? His mind raced, connecting dots, piecing together the fragments of a story that had been hidden for too long. This was a lead that demanded to be pursued, a shadowy figure who might hold the answers they all sought. As the conversation wound down, Margaret reached for a small, worn box. Inside were letters, faded with time, penned by Emily during those summer visits. Frank's hands trembled slightly as he took them, knowing that within those pages lay glimpses of Emily's thoughts and feelings, echoes of a past long buried. With gratitude, Frank took his leave, his thoughts a whirlwind of possibilities. The revelation of a mysterious man, combined with the newfound family connection, painted a picture both complex and compelling. As he drove back, the letters beside him felt like a bridge between the past and the present, a tangible link to the girl who had vanished and the woman who had re-emerged. The path ahead was uncertain, but Frank knew one thing for sure: the truth was closer than ever. The shadows of the past were beginning to recede, making way for the light of understanding. And as the night descended, Frank resolved to follow this lead wherever it might take him, determined to bring Emily the answers she so desperately needed. Frank returned to his hotel room, the letters still in his possession, their presence a constant reminder of his mission. That night, he barely slept, his mind racing with questions. Who was this mysterious man, and why had he vanished at the same time as Emily? The next morning, with coffee in hand and a renewed sense of purpose, Frank reached out to the local police department. The station was bustling, but one face stood out, a detective, younger than most, with a reputation for solving cold cases. Detective Sarah Milton had recently joined the force, bringing with her a fresh perspective and a keen interest in using new technology to solve old mysteries. Frank introduced himself, explaining the situation and the new lead he had uncovered. Sarah listened intently, her eyes widening as Frank recounted Margaret's revelation. "This could be the break we needed," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We've recently started using genetic genealogy to crack unsolved cases. It might just help us here." Frank felt a glimmer of hope. Genetic genealogy, a technique that had already solved numerous cold cases by linking DNA evidence to family trees, could be the key to uncovering the truth about Emily's disappearance. Sarah explained that they could revisit the evidence collected back in 1995, looking for any DNA that might still be viable. The two of them wasted no time. Together, they delved into the dusty archives, retrieving the evidence boxes from Emily's case. Among the items was a hairbrush, a treasure trove of potential DNA. As they carefully collected the samples, Frank felt a sense of urgency. Every moment spent in this small room, surrounded by files and memories, was another moment they were closer to the truth. Over the following days, the DNA samples were sent to a specialized lab. The waiting was excruciating. Frank and Sarah spent the time interviewing locals who might remember the man Margaret had described. Some recalled a charming, unassuming figure who blended into the community seamlessly, but no one knew his true identity. Then, just when the trail seemed to grow cold, a call came from the lab. The results were in. Frank and Sarah rushed to the lab, their hearts pounding with anticipation. The technician greeted them with a mix of excitement and disbelief. "We managed to trace the DNA to a family tree," he said. "It matches several individuals in the area, distant relatives to someone in this community." Frank felt a rush of adrenaline. This breakthrough could finally lead them to Emily's mysterious visitor. But whose family tree was it? And could it lead them to the answers they so desperately sought? As they left the lab, Frank and Sarah knew they had to act quickly. The clock was ticking, and with this new genetic link, they were closer than ever to discovering the identity of the man who had hovered on the periphery of Emily's life. But as they prepared to dive deeper into the web of family connections, one question hung in the air. Would they find Emily's old friend in time? Frank and Sarah wasted no time. They headed straight to the county records office, eager to cross-reference the family names the lab had identified with local records. The tension was palpable. Every minute felt like a countdown to a revelation that could unravel the mystery of Emily's disappearance. As they sifted through birth certificates, marriage licenses, and census records, a pattern began to emerge. There was a name that appeared repeatedly, a name that had been overlooked in the past due to its commonness: Peter Harris. A seemingly benign figure, Peter had lived in the area for decades, his life woven into the fabric of the community. But further digging revealed subtle discrepancies, brief periods where he vanished, only to reappear under slightly altered names in nearby towns. Frank leaned back in his chair, the weight of the discovery settling over him like a heavy fog. Could Peter Harris be the man they were looking for? His appearances and disappearances seemed too coincidental, too conveniently aligned with the times Emily had been seen, and then not seen, over the years. Sarah, flipping through more recent records, came across a document that sent a chill down her spine. A property deed, signed by Peter just months after Emily's disappearance, for a secluded cabin hidden in the dense woods outside town. The cabin was rarely mentioned, never visited by locals, and nestled far from prying eyes. "Frank, look at this," Sarah said, her voice a mix of excitement and fear. "We need to check this place out. It could be where he's been hiding all these years." Indeed, with the address in hand, they set out, the car bouncing along the uneven dirt road that led to the cabin. The trees closed in around them, their branches casting long shadows that seemed to dance ominously in the headlights. Frank's mind raced with possibilities, each more sinister than the last. What would they find at the cabin? Would it hold the answers they needed, or was this another dead end? As they approached the clearing where the cabin stood, Frank and Sarah exchanged a glance, a silent vow to see this through, no matter what awaited them. The cabin loomed ahead, shrouded in darkness, its windows like empty eyes watching their every move. They stepped out of the car, the crunch of gravel underfoot echoing in the stillness of the night. The door creaked open under Frank's hand, revealing a space frozen in time. Dust coated every surface, but the air was thick with a sense of presence, as if someone had been there recently. They moved cautiously through the small rooms, their flashlights casting stark beams that pierced the gloom. In the corner of what appeared to be a makeshift study, Sarah found it. A stack of notebooks, meticulously kept, detailing the life of someone who had slipped through the cracks. Each page was filled with observations, dates, and names that linked back to Emily. It was a chilling testament to a life led in shadows, a life that might finally be exposed to the light. Frank picked up one of the notebooks, his hands trembling slightly. This was the evidence they needed, the missing piece of the puzzle. But as he read through the pages, a new question began to form. If Peter Harris was indeed their man, where was he now? And more importantly, was Emily still with him? Or had she, too, vanished into the night? The answers felt tantalizingly close, yet just out of reach, like a mirage that flickered on the horizon. As they left the cabin, the weight of their discovery bore down on them. They had uncovered a hidden life, but now they had to find the man behind it. The chase was on, and the stakes had never been higher. As they drove back to the city, the notebook sat on the seat between Frank and Sarah like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode with revelations. The car was silent, save for the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of paper as Sarah flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning for any detail that might offer a clue to Peter Harris's whereabouts. The notebooks were a mosaic of obsession, a chilling account of a man who had meticulously tracked Emily's every move. But they also hinted at something else, something darker. Amidst the entries, there were references to a series of remote locations, places where Peter had taken Emily in the years after her disappearance. These notes were interspersed with cryptic symbols and codes that Frank and Sarah couldn't decipher. Back at the station, they spread the notebooks out on a large table in the briefing room, summoning the best minds in forensics and cryptography. Hours turned into days as the team worked tirelessly, cross-referencing the entries with known locations and using advanced software to decode the symbols. It was during one of these late-night sessions, as the team sat bleary-eyed and exhausted, that a breakthrough finally came. A young analyst who had been silently processing data at the corner of the room suddenly spoke up, drawing everyone's attention. "This symbol," he said, pointing to a repeated pattern in the margins of the notebooks, "I think it's a substitution cipher." The room buzzed with renewed energy as they fed the symbols into the computer, the algorithm working to unravel Peter's secret language. Slowly, the codes began to yield coherent words, and with them, a narrative that painted a horrifying picture of control and manipulation. The decoded messages revealed a network of safe houses, a clandestine trail that Peter had used to keep Emily hidden. Each location was marked by a date, suggesting a methodical rotation designed to avoid detection. But the most recent entry was different. It was dated just a week ago and was accompanied by an address in a neighboring state. Frank's heart raced as he realized they were closer than ever. With this new information, he and Sarah coordinated with local authorities to stake out the address. But the clock was ticking, and they knew Peter could move at any moment. As the first light of dawn broke, casting a pale glow over the city, Frank and Sarah prepared for the next step. They were armed with the knowledge of Peter's patterns and the determination to bring Emily home. The notebooks had given them a glimpse into the mind of a man who had lived in the shadows, but they also hinted at a vulnerability, a single misstep that could be his undoing. They were on the brink of revealing Peter Harris's true identity to the world. But as they boarded the plane to the location, one question lingered in their minds. Was Emily ready to re-enter the light after years of darkness? The hum of the plane engines filled the cabin as Frank and Sarah sat silently, each lost in their thoughts. The decoded messages had opened a Pandora's box, revealing not just Peter's meticulous plans, but also the depth of his obsession. Frank turned to Sarah, his voice barely audible over the roar. "Do you think he knows we're onto him?" Sarah shook her head, her eyes fixed on the clouds outside. "If he did, he would have moved already. But we can't take any chances. We need to be ready for anything." The plane touched down as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the tarmac. They were met by a team of local officers, their faces tense with anticipation. The address from the notebooks led them to a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where people still left their doors unlocked. As they approached the house, Frank's heart pounded. A single misstep, a single noise, could send Peter fleeing into the shadows once more. The team moved in, a silent unit of determination and expertise. Inside the house, the air was thick with the smell of stale smoke and neglect. The living room was cluttered with old newspapers and discarded clothing, a testament to a life lived on the run. Sarah's eyes scanned the room, landing on a small pile of documents on the coffee table. "Here," she whispered, gesturing for Frank to take a look. Among the papers was a driver's license with Peter's face, but a different name. He had been living under an alias, blending into the background of his own life. But it was the notebook beneath that caught Frank's attention. It was filled with the same symbol-laden language, but this time they had the key. As they flipped through the pages, a pattern emerged, lists of names, dates, and transactions. It was a ledger of sorts, detailing a network of individuals who had aided Peter over the years. But one name stood out, a name they recognized from the investigation's early days, a name that had slipped through the cracks. "This is it," Frank said, a sense of urgency in his voice. "This is who we need to find." "Ud." With the name in hand, they rushed back to the station, feeding it into the database. The computer hummed, searching through years of records, until finally it landed on a match. The face staring back at them from the screen was older, wearier, but unmistakably the same. It was a neighbor from Emily's childhood, someone who had been overlooked in the chaos of the initial investigation. A man who had seemed ordinary, blending into the fabric of the community, but who had been hiding in plain sight all along. The breakthrough sent ripples through the team, a mixture of disbelief and determination. They had identified the killer, the man who had orchestrated Emily's disappearance, but now they needed to act quickly to prevent him from slipping away again. As they prepared for the next phase, the weight of the years-long search bore down on them. They were closer than ever to unraveling the mystery that had haunted so many lives. But with each step they took, the stakes grew higher, and the margin for error narrower. The clock was ticking, and as they moved into action, one question loomed large. Would they reach Emily before it was too late? The team gathered in the dimly lit conference room, the air thick with anticipation and a hint of disbelief. Frank stood at the front, the image of the neighbor projected onto the screen behind him. "This is George Harlan," Frank began, his voice steady but charged with emotion. A man who, on the surface, seemed to be just another face in the crowd, but beneath that ordinary exterior was a web of deceit and manipulation. As the team listened, the pieces began to fall into place. George Harlan had been a fixture in the neighborhood back in 1995, a friendly presence at community events, always willing to lend a hand. But it was precisely this unassuming nature that had allowed him to move undetected, orchestrating a plan that would take decades to unravel. Frank continued. George was known to be close with many families, including Emily's. He was trusted, respected even. But what we didn't know was that he had a darker side, one that he kept meticulously hidden. He paused, letting the gravity of the revelation sink in. George used his position to manipulate those around him, covering his tracks with an almost surgical precision. But what he didn't anticipate was the network of people he manipulated would eventually lead us back to him. In the days following their discovery, the team worked tirelessly, piecing together George's movements over the years. They traced his connections, uncovering a series of business dealings and personal associations that painted a picture of a man living a double life. As they delved deeper, they found evidence of George's involvement in a broader network of illicit activities that had provided him with the resources to maintain his facade and keep Emily hidden. But it was his arrogance, his belief that he was untouchable, that would ultimately be his downfall. Frank addressed the team once more. "We have a warrant for his arrest, but we need to move carefully. George is unpredictable, and we can't risk losing him now. The plan was set in motion, a coordinated effort involving local law enforcement and federal agents. Every detail had been meticulously planned, every possibility accounted for. The team knew they were walking a fine line, and the pressure was palpable. As dawn broke, a convoy of unmarked vehicles pulled up outside George's modest suburban home. The neighborhood was quiet, unsuspecting of the drama about to unfold. Officers took their positions, the tension in the air almost visible. Inside, George Harlan sat at his kitchen table, sipping his morning coffee, oblivious to the net closing around him. He had spent years evading detection, confident in his ability to outsmart those who sought him. But today, his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. A sharp knock at the door shattered the morning calm. George's expression shifted from confusion to realization as he opened the door to find himself face to face with Frank and his team. "George Harlan," Frank announced, his voice firm and resolute, "you're under arrest for the abduction of Emily Turner and the ensuing cover-up. You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs clicked into place, George's facade crumbled. The man who had been a ghost in their investigation was finally tangible, his secrets laid bare for the world to see. But as they led him away, one question remained unanswered. Where was Emily? And would they find her before it was too late? The door closed behind George as he was escorted to the waiting vehicle, his composure unraveling with each step. The quiet neighborhood, now alive with the murmurs of early risers, bore witness to the culmination of years of deceit and manipulation. Inside the interrogation room, the air was thick with anticipation. George sat across from Frank, his eyes darting around the sterile room, searching for an escape that wasn't there. Frank leaned in, his voice calm but firm. "We've been chasing ghosts for years, George, but it ends here. It's time to tell the truth." George hesitated, the weight of his choices pressing down on him, but as the silence stretched, the reality of his situation began to sink in. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he began, his voice a trembling whisper. Emily was just a means to an end." The confession unfolded slowly, each word a revelation. George spoke of a life spiraling out of control, of debts and desperation that led him to make unthinkable choices. He detailed the network of illicit activities that had kept him afloat, a web of deception that had ensnared Emily and, eventually, her children. Frank listened intently, piecing together the final fragments of a puzzle that had haunted him for years. "And Emily? Where is she now?" he pressed, his patience waning. George's eyes met Frank's, a flicker of something resembling remorse crossing his features. "She's safe," he admitted, "living in a shelter downtown. I made sure of that." With this information, a team was dispatched immediately. As they navigated the streets towards the shelter, the weight of hope and dread hung in the balance. Would they find Emily, or would this lead prove another dead end? The shelter was a modest building, tucked away amidst the urban sprawl. Inside, the atmosphere was one of quiet resilience, a sanctuary for those seeking refuge from the storms of their pasts. As the team entered, eyes turned towards them, curiosity mingling with caution. And then they saw her, Emily, sitting in a corner, her children by her side. The years had etched lines of hardship on her face, but there was a strength in her eyes, a determination that had carried her through the darkest of times. As the officers approached, Emily rose slowly, instinctively pulling her children closer. Recognition dawned as Frank stepped forward, his expression a mix of relief and gravity. "Emily Turner?" he asked softly, as if afraid to shatter the moment. Emily nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I never thought anyone would find me," she whispered, her voice a blend of gratitude and disbelief. The journey to justice had been long and fraught with obstacles, But each step had led to this reunion. In the days that followed, George's trial would captivate the nation, a story of betrayal and perseverance that resonated deeply with all who heard it. The courtroom was packed, the air charged with tension and anticipation. George, now a shadow of his former self, faced the consequences of his actions. The evidence was overwhelming, his confession damning. The jury's verdict was swift and decisive, guilty on all counts. Sentencing brought little solace to those affected, but it marked the end of a chapter that had consumed so many lives. In the aftermath, Emily began the slow process of rebuilding, supported by a community that had rallied around her. As the dust settled, reflections on justice and memory emerged. The case had unearthed not just a crime, but a history of resilience, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. For Frank, the resolution was bittersweet, a victory tempered by the scars left behind. And yet, in the flickering light of memory, there was hope. Hope that the past, though painful, could pave the way for a brighter future. A future where justice was not just a verdict, but a promise that no one would be forgotten, that every story, no matter how buried, would one day be told.